Hello, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here for this conversation with the Black Opera Alliance and the Asian Opera Alliance. Community is vital, and that's what we're here to affirm today. But there's no community without unity. It's something that is very important to us, both of our organizations, and we're here to make sure that we are in dialogue to make sure that while we support our own constituencies and communities, we're creating a sense of unity so that we can create equity and systemic change in the field of opera, not for some of us, but for all of us. My name is Garrett McQueen. I'm the president of Trillworks Media, co-host and executive producer of the Trilloquy podcast and a number of other broadcasts and digital medias. I come to the art as a bassoonist. I spent the first decade of my career playing bassoon, and I made a career shift to make change. So finding and being a leadership council member for the Black Opera Alliance has really been transformative for me and a vital part of my work. And I'm very happy to be here to help facilitate today's conversation. So, of course, we have representatives today from both the Black Opera Alliance and the Asian Opera Alliance. So we're going to invite everyone up to the stage here one by one to introduce themselves, beginning with Helen. Helen, good evening.
Good evening. So my name is Helen Wang, and I am a soprano and a co-founder of the group Wear Yellow Proudly. So what we do at Wear Yellow Proudly is we showcase the art and music of different Asian artists and use it as a platform to raise culture awareness of Asian cultures and also bridging the gap between Eastern and Western culture.
Thank you so much, Helen, for joining us this evening. Up next from the Asian Opera Alliance, we have Tiffany. Tiffany, hello.
Hello, thank you. It's great to be here. My name is Tiffany Chang, and I am a conductor. I conduct both orchestral and opera, and also do new music. So I love being diverse in my artistic work, and I'm based in the Boston area. My mission is to help musicians feel more fulfilled in the work that they do, and in a way of doing that, we feel more seen and we feel more valued. And I am what drives me is knowing that there's this statistic that orchestral musicians are quite low in the job satisfaction, have low job satisfaction rates. And there's a study done in the 90s that basically revealed that the job satisfaction rates of orchestral musicians are below that of prison guards and flight attendants. And I think there's a lot of anecdotal evidence in our lives today that reveals that hasn't changed that much. So that is what I love to tackle and try to make things better in that regard.
A change leader in the arts, even literally changing and leading change from the podium. Thank you so much. Up next, I want to introduce everyone to Nina. Nina, good evening.
Hi there. I'm Nina Yoshida Nelson. I'm a mezzo-soprano and the co-founder of the Asian Opera Alliance. We got together last year right after the shootings in Atlanta and inspired largely by the work that the Black Opera Alliance was doing. We thought that it was time to come together as a community and start telling our stories as well. So we're happy to be here today to share with you all.
Absolutely, and we're happy to have you. Thank you so much. Now, from the Black Opera Alliance, I'd love to introduce everyone to James. Hey, James.
Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be here with you. If I had to describe what I do, and I'm just gonna take that leap, Garrett. I don't know if you're gonna ask me to, but I was going to do it anyway. You can't stop me. I'm a baritone. I'm a composer, but my primary work is sneaking, shoehorning, shoving Blackness onto the concert and operatic stage whenever I can. I do this because I know that Black people class up the joint whenever we appear. And I also do it because I have felt the feeling of being the only chocolate chip in the room. And I don't want that anymore. I want there to be more Black people. I want there to be more melanin, more brown and shades of brown everywhere I go. So I'm very pleased to be here, not only with Garrett and Jamie, who will be joining us, but also with Nina, Helen, and Tiffany. Thank you all for joining us so much.
Thank you so much. A self-described chocolate chip. I see you. And last, but of course not least, Jamie Ali Law. Hey, Jamie.
Hello, Garrett. Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Ali Law, and I come to opera as a soprano, and I am also a member of the Black Opera Alliance Leadership Council. So much like all of us, I'm here to make sure that everyone who wants to be in this work has a welcome place of entry and welcome place of being. And my perspective, the area that I'm most knowledgeable about is as a Black person. And so that is the sector that I advocate from, with the hopes and with the intentions that everyone is granted platform for their voices, in whatever way we demonstrate that. So I'm happy to be here with my peeps from Black Opera Alliance, with my peeps from Asian Opera Alliance, and with the peeps who are in the audience. So I just want to remind everyone, this is a conversation. So join us in the comments with your questions, with your comments. Treat it like the Black church. Say amen when you hear a good word.
Don't heckle us too much.
If there's something you hear that's like, I don't know, say something. We might be able to clarify. Or if you just really want to know more, if you have any questions, if you have something to contribute, the chat is open. So we are live streaming on YouTube. We are live streaming on Facebook, and we invite you to engage on both platforms.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Jamie. So, Nina, you sort of spoke to this a little bit in your introduction, but I wonder if you'll offer us a little bit more of a context, not only around the creation of the Asian Opera Alliance, but why it's a vital part of what we're all trying to do here in opera.
Absolutely. So last year, after those shootings in Atlanta, opera companies all over the US started posting these, we support our Asian artists. And as we started looking around, one company tagged me in a post. And the first thing that happened was, alongside me, they tagged the wrong Asian soprano, which happens a lot. And then the second thing that happened was, as you look at every single person that was in those photographs, they were all Asians who had been typecast into Asian roles. And so I contacted a friend of mine and I said, the next step is to get Asians out of only being pigeonholed into these Asian roles like Madame Butterfly. And she asked me at the time, well, Nina, how many non-Asian roles do you do in a standard season? And I'd never taken the opportunity or the time to think about that. And as I started to add it up, I realized that, I've done over 150 Suzukis. I've done countless other Asian identifying roles, in the past 10 years. And in 10 years, I had done 3 non-Asian roles. And so those statistics alone that I wasn't even aware of, I was like, okay, since I'm not aware of it, no one else is, it's time to start sharing our stories. So that's kind of how we came together.
Yeah, and when I think about Jamie, I'll pass this to you. When I think about some of the conversations that must have within communities, I feel like for a long time we've held on to certain things being kept in house. But after hearing Nina speak about just her experience, one of countless experiences, it seems like it's time for some of these inter-community conversations to get out to the rest of the world, so we know what we're dealing with.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, as I said, I'm a huge advocate for people having the platforms to tell our own stories, because, what's that saying to where it's the oh Lord, look, Garrett, you probably be able to help me out. You always with the quotes. You might have a saying for me, but it's something about how the hunter gets to tell the story, right? We don't hear the lion side because the
Right.
hunter gets to tell the story. And so I think that it is essential at this stage that we really take the stage, take the platform, and speak for ourselves so that we can have a truer idea of how it is, rather than, just kind of trying to feed ourselves off of these narratives that we should be okay with. But then it's like we look around and it's like, is it just me? And I think that when we bring these conversations together again, we turn on the lights, and everything can be seen, and then there's less of the kind of the gaslighting kind of am I crazy, or trying to convince ourselves maybe they meant this, or maybe it's not that bad, or whatever. And which is what is so significant about Nina's revelation, even in her own space, right? I feel as though many of us have had this kind of moment to be like, wait a minute, wait a minute. If I just look at my own experience, I can point to some things that need to change. And when we put those experiences together, then not only do we see the bigger picture, but we also see that we have partners in this work.
Yeah. Helen, I want to come to you as we've been dealing with COVID. One of the unfortunate truths is that there's been a lot of violence specifically pointed at Asian people when we talk about everything that's been going on. I wonder if you can speak to some of these issues as they apply to opera. Again, we take for granted so often that we need these community-centric efforts because there are community-centric issues. I wonder if you can speak to that.
Totally. I think just to backtrack just slightly, so this whole COVID situation to me also kind of started a little bit before everyone else in the United States as well. So I was born in China, and a majority of my family still lives in China. And during the beginning COVID, my entire family was there. So to me, this pandemic kind of started 3 months before it happened, or everyone else around me. And it was just interesting that in terms of news media in the Asian community, we were seeing these news of violence every single day, consistently for months, of people being attacked on the street, spit at, called really ugly names. And I have friends on the internet that were being bullied and called coronavirus. One friend was just minding her own business on Facebook, and then a random person reached out to her and said, "You and your husband are both stupid, ugly Chinese bitch who deserves to die, and you need to pay for what you have done for the rest of the world." So yeah, all that was going on, and it was crazy that nothing was being covered in mainstream media, and no one was really talking about this. And it's unfortunate. I feel like a lot of my own friends who are not Asians were saying, "Oh, Helen, I think you're just being too sensitive. This is not really happening. You're making this up in your mind." But to me, what is a blessing in disguise is that often in times of hardship, it unites us together. So I had a conversation with Nina just a few weeks ago that before COVID, the Asian singers in the community, there's some discussion of what is going on in our daily lives, the struggles that we have. I had a close-knit group of friends that we would discuss things, and we would message things when, things came up. But a lot of things were just kind of brushed over. Nina and I had worked together before, but we even have never discussed some of the things that came up. And now she's becoming one of like my go-to person when anything come up. I was just texting her earlier today about something that came up through email today. So I'm really grateful for all the wonderful things that came out of such an ugly period of time.
Yeah, yeah, it's you know, it's something for us to always shake our heads at, but on one hand, James, we know the story. This isn't surprising to us. So of course, when we talk about going within the world of opera, it all just boils down to an even more concentrated degree. As we look for commonalities and talk about working together, it's important to have that unity, but it's also important, James, to talk about the idea of people of color, or that word BiPOC, as something that in some ways has impeded change or helped gaslight people into out of believing the truth that they see in their lived experiences. I wonder if you'll talk a little bit about that word BiPOC within the context of, you know, trying to create this unity among communities.
Yeah, it's not surprising that both my fiance and our cat have vacated the room because they know I have a vendetta against this term, against this acronym. I, you know, it's precisely because my friendships and relationships with people who are supposedly BIPOC or POC but not Black, precisely because those relationships have deepened my life so much
Mm-hmm.
because of the contrast and nuance between our experiences, right? I have a lot of Native friends, especially particularly from what is called now Massachusetts and what is called now New Jersey by colonials or colonists, which is where I am right now. I have a lot of Chinese American friends, and I have a lot of Korean American friends. And getting to know the nuances and the specificity has brought nuance and richness to my life, right? So every time I see one of these terms, I think to myself, okay, what we were given were the leftovers from the white table, literally the leftovers, right? So what we all know on this call about the history of what whiteness is in this country is it is an accretive term, right? It widens to include everyone who is not Black at some point,
Mm-hmm.
and your acceptance is conditional, right? So you have access if you are not seen as white, what is the perceived visual components of whiteness, which are not Caucasian, not necessarily European. It's a very arbitrary set of markers, right? If you are not Black, you have visibly Black, you have behaviors you can do to gain access to whiteness.
Hmm.
You have respectability you can trade for access to whiteness, right? It is never actually yours, which is why we are all still lumped in POC or BIPOC, right? That reminds us that even if we are treated occasionally, and even the visibly Black people on this call could be treated as white or having access to whiteness, say if we talk to somebody on the phone in a certain way, right? Why do you think my parents gave my brother and I what they call old dead white guy names, right? So those particular markers can be traded for access, but we are not actually ever in.
Mm-hmm.
None of us on this call are ever in. We have to do something to be treated as acceptable. So BIPOC is just given us as a leftover. It's like, okay, here's your BIPOC table. If you act right, you might get some access to where the big boys play. They're almost always boys, right? So, for me, I remember just last year, my kind of attitude or antipathy towards BIPOC was fully solidified when I ran into this fabulous librarian at our town library, South Orange Library here. And she's a Black woman, incredibly competent, has gotten like most impressive librarian award of the year, like 5 years in a row, whatever that award is. I don't want to offend librarians, but they got their own awards, right? So she's amazing. And she specializes in children's lit in particular and has brought so much actually diverse children's lit into our library. So we were talking one day and she was like, yeah, I don't know, man. I would like to be nice when people try to reach out for BIPOC or POC issues, but it was a group of Black female librarians, and they called us BiPOC. And she was like, just call me Black. You know, like, I'm right here. We're all right here. We're all Black. So call us Black. So that's kind of where I am. I mean, I'm so glad that y'all call it the Asian Opera Alliance, because using words that are actually more specific about any group that we belong to seems to be almost anathema in the very circles that say they want more diversity. So I'm really glad y'all didn't find some other, BIPOC adjacent way to refer to yourselves. Asian. Thank you.
Jamie, I see that you've unmuted there.
Well, I was just going to say, because, to James's point about the, really what it does break down to is like the white table and then the BIPOC table. And it's muddied and blurred because it's like, any configuration of BIPOC will do, it's like, throw a couple of more, just mix it up amongst yourselves. I don't care how you divvy it up, but, just give me some of that BIPOCness in there. Right. And it's like, what is the intention, right? When we do have these, and it's often opportunities, right? Whether it be mentorships or scholarships or just whatever these what is the intention? Let's speak to that so that we can, to James's point, be specific about the work it is we're looking to do. But oftentimes that intention is not clear. We're just trying to do something to say we did it. So let's just, as long as it's BIPOC, whatever that looks like, we did it. And that's the part that I'm like, it does a disservice to the very specific aspects that everyone brings that we are now able to acknowledge when we acknowledge that there's a Black American experience, and even within that there's diversity, right? And there's an Asian American experience, and even with that there is diversity. But the more diluted we become in our language, it's more disrespectful to me. That's what it feels like for me, because it's just like, let's just something, some kind of configuration. And I saw Nina. I was gonna pause, but I'm like,
and actually, Tiffany, I want to bring you into the conversation, and Nina, maybe you can offer some backup. When we talk about this white framing of BIPOC as just this one shaded thing, on our side of the table, we're always talking about things like not only tokenization, but code switching as it applies to what these BIPOC seeking organizations are looking for. I have to imagine that when it comes to the conversations in conjunction with the Asian American experience, this idea of the model minority myth must be something that has to be addressed and tackled, again, to the point that BIPOC and access aren't always aligned. And there are certain things that people who view race and identity in that way may not see things like the model minority myth, the issues of code switching on our side, or maybe even other conversations.
Yeah, I think this is really wonderful conversation. And I think that we often don't think about the world that we live in and how every single person sees the world through different lenses. And we also don't realize that we are so set in the way that things are, the way that we do things, and that's how we define culture. And there's a couple of quotes I want to bring up, but one of them is that, and this is from a surgeon in Boston called Atul Gawande, and he's Indian, and he talks about culture as being a sum of habits and expectations. And we forget how habitual our actions are, and we forget how habitual our thoughts are. And we kind of go around operating in society, performing those habits, thinking those thoughts, and it becomes comfortable for us regardless of who we are. We could be within the BiPOC umbrella, or we could be in the mainstream umbrella. But we all are very comfortable in these habits, and so breaking those habits is, I think, a very challenging thing for human beings. And in regard to the conversation that we were just having about the lack of specificity, right? I think that there's a level of performative action that contrarily that doesn't really help. On paper, it looks great that we're inviting all these voices in, but this brings me to another quote that I want to share, which says, "Inclusion drives diversity, not the other way around." And I think that really spoke to me, because I feel like that we could be in amongst a diverse group of people, but it doesn't automatically mean that we're included in the conversation. And it doesn't automatically we don't automatically feel safe to speak up. And I think it's the safe to speak up part that holds us back sometimes in saying the things that we want to say, in taking the things to the next level, and really deciphering what are the mechanisms that are in place that hold us where we are.
Especially, Nina, especially considering, with this habit plus expectation equals culture sort of equation, for me, what that says is that we have an even greater responsibility to break down some of these expectations that we didn't create.
Absolutely. And, it's really interesting for me to hear you all talk about this term BiPOC, right? Because how I feel when I hear it, I feel like BiPOC in general is a way of othering us, right? Grouping us all together. But then we also, as Asians, get othered even more and smaller even more in just being included in the rest of the people of color. Our lived experiences, like Hispanic lived experiences, are, there are so many different other people of color who are then just grouped into the others, that it just makes me feel so small in that name of like identification. And so, it's a term that at first I was like, okay, I see. But like, the more I hear it, the more offended I get by it, because, it's just not fair for me to be othered in a community of othered people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always thought about that, because, again, that general POC, that people of color, it can't, Helen, just be applied to, and I'm thinking specifically about the word Asian. We have so many, not only experiences and cultures, but again, back to that word of expectation. There are certain expectations for someone from India that are different than someone from Japan or China, especially as it applies to the arts, things like colorism. I mean, it just seems like we, among all of the work we're doing in building this unity, taking those terms like people of color and BiPOC and really actively challenging them being a part of that work. Did you have any thoughts or ideas on that, Helen, specifically the idea of part of this activist work being actively attacking those phrases and those terms?
Absolutely. So just to piggyback on what Nina said, I had a personal story from this past summer. So I was talking to a friend about this term BiPOC, and this friend, I adore this person, but they had said, well, this term is very different from the term POC. So because you are not Black and you're not Native, that means you are white, Helen. You're not really a person of color. You're not a BiPOC. And I was thinking to myself, well, after being called coronavirus on the street and, being called yellow growing up and being told right now that I have white privileges and technically white, that, that's a very interesting experience in life that I have led. So yeah, that at that moment is when I knew I was done with the term BiPOC. And I'm sure there are other terms out there that we can find and discover that can better describe our experience. And to go in on a little bit more, Garrett, what you had asked, just in terms of the diversity in the term Asian experience, especially the word Asian American, this word really was created for a political purpose. The Asian community is really diverse in America. And a lot of time people only focus on, people that are from Japan, China, Korea, and that's it. But that's not true. There's a very wide range of experiences, as well as financial background, fortunately and unfortunately. And that's not always considered. And really outside the United States, people are not lumped together at all. But it's a way for this group of people to unite and fight together, because that's how, people are greater in numbers. That's how you fight politically.
Yeah. Jamie, one of the things that we've both experienced in our work with the Black Opera Alliance is dealing with opera companies who say, well, we have this people of color statement. What do you expect us to do? Sign a pledge for every different organization that comes our way? That's maybe not what they have literally said, but in essence, that is what the language has been.
Now, some have said that too, though.
Yeah.
Some have said that too, though. It's like, are we supposed to sign a pledge for everybody? And it's like, yeah.
So what we're talking about right now, considered, what's your answer to those folks when they ask, should we just sign a pledge for everybody?
See, here's the thing, and I'm so glad that we're going here, and that Helen contributed her part to it, and Darrell in the comments said global majority. The whole perspective is skewed, right? The perspective that says we got to find an expedient way to refer to all of those people, right? So even the need to come up with a term is from a faulty white supremacist lens, right? Because it's like, well, wait, why we ain't coming up with for terms for this over here? Or why must all of these people and experiences be lumped together for whose convenience, right? Because it's not hard for me to say Black. It's not hard for me to say Asian. It's not hard for me to say, Taiwanese. It's not hard for me to say who someone identifies as. It is not difficult for me to identify you according to how you identify yourself. So even just this need to come up with an acronym so we can handle all those people, the approach, the perspective, that very drive, that very impetus is the thing that is off at its core. And that's why I get back to, wait, what are we doing with this thing, right? Because if we're looking for retribution, if we're looking for restoration, it's going to need to be a lot more specific than BiPOC, because the Chinese community is due some restoration that is different than the Black community, that is different than the Japanese community, that is different than the Indian community, that is different than the Mexican community, right? So what is we really doing? Are we just trying to, again, going back to the quote that Tiffany shared, are we just trying to get this diversity thing going? We got to see some different faces up here. And here's the thing, the opera companies are getting it. They're getting it. We're seeing some of these posters that make us really excited, right? I mean, it's beautiful. People are beautiful. the diversity of the tapestry is gorgeous, and don't get it twisted, right? So it's like, what are we really looking to do? Are we just looking to have more color on our poster? Are we really looking to restore what has been stolen from so many? Because different things have been stolen at different times in different increments and in different ways, and they require their specific solutions, and BiPOC ain't gonna get it.
Yeah,
Not
it's really it's about critiquing the value system and the spirit behind these things. Nina, one thing that I wanted to make sure that we touched on in this conversation was, again, with this ultimately inappropriately, but used term Asian as it applies to Western classical music. Most people don't see so-called Asian people as underrepresented in the arts, especially on the orchestral side. What are the specific conversations that you have or think about when it comes to Asian representation within opera?
Absolutely. So we are seeing now tons of season announcements, right, for next season. And I don't know if you guys pay attention, but we pay attention to how many season announcements have been made with zero Asian representation in them. And it's like, after being here and doing this work, there are still so many companies who are not seeing the fact that we're here. And for so many years, we have been solely typecast into the roles like Madame Butterfly and Suzuki that we then can't get out of. And so for us, not only are we talking about how we can get out of this pigeonholing, but also if you look at these conservatories, there are lots of Asian singers in the conservatories. What's happening to them so they're not reaching into our industry? Where is the breakdown? And so this is something that we are all talking about, you know, as the Asian Opera Alliance. How can we make sure that these singers who are studying in conservatories are then making it to our main stages, because it's not happening as it is.
Right, right. Tiffany, I want to ask you a similar question because, again, you know, and you have acknowledged that you work on the opera and the orchestral side of things. So, you know, as an orchestra professional, I've never been a part of an ensemble that didn't have lots of Asian representation. But again, that's not quite the same as representation in opera. Maybe I'll ask you the question that Nina ended with. Where, from your perspective, where is that breakdown? What's happening between the conservatory and the professional stage, and the professional opera stage, to be specific?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. And I appreciate you're asking that, because it really forces us to really reflect on the you know, what's obvious that we see but we don't never talk about. And I think that sometimes, from my experience, when I think seeing a lot of Asian faces in the orchestral scene speaks to the us not really feeling like we are othered, but yet we are other at the same time.
Mm.
And I think that is what it drives a subconscious it drives us to think subconsciously about how, oh, well, we are not othered, so therefore we don't get to be part of the activism that's happening, or we shouldn't be a part of that. Or and I think that in the Asian culture there is a I'm brought up as someone who really, you know, doesn't really speak up unless I'm asked to speak up, you know. And I think that a lot of Asian that's a virtue in a lot of Asian cultures. And I think that we are not, even though there's a lot of us, we don't often feel like that we have a place to speak up, and we just kind of go with the flow. And that's sort of what I've seen in both in the conservatory setting and also in the professional orchestral setting. Mm-hmm. And what I'm really interested in is how that is different than the opera world. And I wonder if, you know, if the problem is in this, you know, this notion that the typesetting of, we see that this role requires this kind of ethnicity, so therefore we're only looking for that ethnicity. And I wonder if that is something that's subconscious, that we think about when we are casting, when we are thinking about who we're putting on stage, or how we are representing, how we're telling the story. And I think that we're not creative enough and innovative enough in how we tell stories.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you and I'll come right to you, Helen. But one thing I wanted to underscore that you said, Tiffany, I'm so glad that you spoke to being in the space but not having a voice in the space being so much of the issue. In preparation, how I contextualized this part of the conversation was heard and not seen versus seen and not heard. I definitely feel like the heard but not seen is a conversation that we have a lot. Black music being on the stage and the Black tradition being on the stage, but us completely being missing from it in body. I think it's an interesting sort of dynamic. But Helen, sorry, you had something to add there.
Tiffany, how beautifully put everything you've said. Thank you so much. And I just want to piggyback and address one thing that you said, that this thing of, sitting back and listen, being a virtual in the Asian culture. I think, unfortunately, there is now a stereotype in the Western world about that as well. I know for myself, going through schools, I was told by many mentors that me being an Asian person, I have to be extra loud. I have to be really active. I have to be better than everyone on stage. I have to be extra good at my language just to play at an equal field as everyone else, because there's an automatic assumption that I will be quiet. I won't have an opinion. And I had talked to Nina quite a lot about this in the past, that everything around this topic is a lot more complicated than this simple stereotype. There's a lot of history, a lot of, just the background of being an immigrant, as well as culture history behind all of this. It's not a simple black and white issue. But unfortunately, in this narrative that the world has created, it's just, this is who you are, this is the expectation. In order to break out of it, you need to do your darn hardest.
Yeah, and Jamie, that's why, I think what's being underscored here is the reason for the nuance and the specificity of these conversations beyond just BiPOC. Because when I hear Helen talk about the expectation is that you need to speak up and be extra loud, on the other side of things, Black women can't do that by any means, because that falls outside of a different type of respectability.
Again, it's all centering this myth of white supremacy and the proximity to it, right? And so we are all then conditioned to work and to aspire to that as the central meeting point, right? So Black, too loud, too present, need you to scale that back. Asian, any Asian, you're quiet, you're going to need to be bigger, you're going to need to take up more space. And the thing that we must interact with is that none of those assessments have anything to do with us, and have everything to do with this image that has been created. And then, to speak to Nina's point about, looking at the season announcements as they roll out, and I see it again as pointing to the deficiency of this BiPOC model, because it is possible to fill an entire season with diversity and not have one Black person, not
Right.
have one Asian person, right? And so, and it's easy to have that, and also it's easy to be gaslit into this conversation of lack, right? Like, well, we only have so many, and so what's not what's not said is, listen, these have got to be white people. Just is. So this only leaves this much for BiPOC.
Mm-hmm.
Speak on
And
that.
there's only so many. What are we supposed to do? Write letters to everybody? Or what are we supposed to do? Sign everyone's pledges saying that they want to be represented in a way that is balanced in how they exist in this country? You want us to make that promise to everybody? And my thing is, well, who are you to make a promise to anybody?
Mhm.
Right? Who are you to be the holder of the strings?
Mm-hmm.
So it's all troublesome, and it tells on itself when it comes down to these different areas, because it's, to your point, Garrett, you will definitely see lots of Asian visibility in certain spaces, right? And then to Tiffany's point, then that becomes an assault in and of itself, right? Because it's like, well, I see people, but we're not really seen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you speak from that place, right? Because then it's like there are others who are not seen at all, right? And really what it comes down to, there's this saying within the Black community where they talk about crabs in a barrel, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like, but yo, crabs are not supposed to be in a barrel.
Right. Why is there a barrel?
Why is there a barrel? So now we don't have to be silenced because there's visibility, but there's there's still no representation. There's still no true depiction, a truthful depiction.
And I know, Jamie, you mentioned that there's a question or a comment in the chat that you wanted to address.
Mhm.
Oh, here it is here. In challenging white supremacy as a structure, isn't it sometimes productive to speak and organize as a non-white collective? I think, I can speak to this, James, I can pass it along to you. I think it's really a necessity. But again, the nuance is that how it's viewed on the outside is this sort of BiPOC coalition instead of communities of people with specific needs and specific bones to pick with the opera industry as we're here today. And that's the part of it that isn't always seen. Really, I'll go as far as to say the part of it that's rarely seen.
Yeah, it's there. There have been so many wonderful things said that kind of got me in the church spirit. So I've been dancing around listening to y'all anyway. But um, yeah, Garrett, I absolutely agree, and I think I will reinforce that by highlighting something that Jamie said actually a lot earlier in this conversation, around the 10-minute mark. I think, Jamie, because you mentioned something, you mentioned reparations and you mentioned restoration. When we were talking about the specifics of the nuances of our community's identities, which is what we're talking about here. We're not talking
Mm-hmm.
about labels. We're not talking about brownie points, things that organizations can do to get cookies. We're talking about calling us by our names, right? Just the way that we introduced ourselves in this meeting, right? I would never dream of calling Helen Nina. She told me how she wants to be addressed. So that's really what it is, right? But when Jamie started talking about restoration, it started me thinking about different words for this acronym of DEI.
Yeah.
Because diversity we've seen is a kind of a wishy-washy term, right? Diversity can just mean variety of anything, right? And in this world, there is often more variety in, say, the color of the ties that the old white men wear in the boardroom than actual variety in terms of our skin color, right? So we want to be intentional about what kind of diversity there is, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's supposed to be. Inclusion in what? Equity defined by whom? what kind of diversity, right? So the acronyms, you know, I mean, we could even keep the same BiPOC acronym if we changed it to something that actually made sense. But for DEI, I was thinking about it and I was like, okay, diversity, maybe that could work. But what about equity? Who defines what equity is? If we're talking about inclusion, I would rather swap that I out for intention, because intentionality is what we're talking about here, not inclusion in a corrupt system. Jamie, you mentioned the fact that nobody is checking for who else can sing the roles that are supposedly white. Who said? Even Mozart and Beethoven and Brahms weren't saying, I mean, I know Brahms didn't write an opera and Beethoven wrote a really hard one, but I know they weren't saying, even back then, when they wouldn't have, you know, faced any backlash, you know, obviously they could have just written not for the Negroes or not for the Asians, you know, even back then they weren't saying that, right? Contessa, il conte, Papageno, Papagena.
I mean, to be fair, we have from the opera that you're citing, we also have Monostatos. So
I knew you know why you know where I'm going here. So like that is a perfect example, right? Like we just was it last year or 2020 when Will Liverman was the first Black Papageno at the Met? Really? Like that's what we're talking about these roles that are not supposedly not racially coded but are coded white, right? What's the who says? So there's a lot of work to be done, and I think that it's actually really poetic because of the ways that you guys have shared your experiences. I think it's actually really poetic that the Black Opera Alliance and Asian Opera Alliance are interfacing in this way, because y'all have talked about being seen and not heard, and we are often heard and not seen. And when we are seen, we don't also get to be heard, right? The loud, the angry Black woman or angry Black man thing, right? So in a way, it's a perfect liaison, if you will, because the access to power that white folks' obsession with Asian visibility sometimes affords us, right? Like y'all, like there is an opportunity to infiltrate. On our end, when we get higher standards for how our voices are heard on classical stages, we can then require them to actually include the rest of us. We both of our coalitions, if you will, our alliances, we have tools to use, but this chat and the many more that I know will come are the important start, because unless we talk about it, unless we name the thing, we can't start to pick the lock if we don't acknowledge that it's locked.
Right. So this is my question, Nina. You know, as a Black people, we argue about Porgy and Bess all the time. What do we do with that? That's just one of those conversations. What I want to hear from you, and also Helen and Tiffany, what do we do with Cho-Cho-san? What do we do with these operas that are regularly performed but showcase this Asian identity that's racist, that's problematic, that's outdated?
So we at the Asian Opera Alliance really feel like these operas like Madame Butterfly, Pearl Fishers, Turandot should not be canceled. However, let's have those really difficult conversations around them. Let's come up with new ways to present them. Most importantly, let's not pigeonhole our artists specifically only into these roles. So let's make sure that we've got Asian representation other places in our season. What we really want to see is a very colorful stage. We want to see our stages reflecting the way our society looks, right? So Butterfly was not written for an Asian woman to sing. However, you know, there have been Asian women who have been singing her since it was first premiered. We don't have to claim that role as our own. It's not our story. However, if you're not including us anywhere else, at the bare minimum, you should make sure that you've got some Asians in your Butterfly. That being said, you know, we get so pigeonholed into these roles. Like I would ask our white colleagues, When was the last time that you worked at 3 different companies, singing 3 different operas in the same season and worked with the same person, those in 3 operas? Helen and I have worked together 3 times this season. And it's specifically because we are Asian. That's it. You know, we're thankful for the work, of course. However, you know, this doesn't happen for our white colleagues. And so we want to be seen as something other than our ethnicity. And I think this is something that yet to happen on the operatic stage.
I'm going to circle back around to that with you, Tiffany. You know, there is a diversity of thought across our Black Opera Alliance constituency when it comes to this issue of repertoire. I'm one of the people that says throw Porgy and Bess away. Is there not that radical, you know, so-called far left feeling among the Asian Opera Alliance constituency? Is that a part of the conversation? Getting rid of that repertoire?
Well, I want to second everything that Nina had said, because I think she was spot on in saying that, you know, those are pieces of repertoire that we shouldn't just disregard because they're problematic. But the most important part is to have the more important thing is to have the conversation about why it's problematic and to be innovative in how we tackle it. And I think that we never get to the innovation, which is the fun part, unless we have the conversation. And I feel like we're stuck in that space before the conversation has even taken place. And so what I personally advocate for is to start those conversations as often as possible so that we can start normalizing this idea that, you know, that we can talk about it. I think that a lot of times people in the industry of all colors and sizes, we are just afraid. We are scared to step on toes. We are scared to say the wrong thing. We are scared to, you know, to perform badly. And because of that, as artists, we often hesitate to speak up about what we think. We hesitate to ask the hard questions, let alone to try to answer the hard questions. So I think from my perspective is, especially as a leader, is to try to encourage our community, the Asian community, to be the leaders in starting these conversations. Because without these conversations, there is nowhere to go. You know, if we don't start, we don't, you know, we can't take the first step. And I think that this is what we're talking about is a microcosm of a larger sense of identity for all of us. Mm-hmm. I think that we as people struggle with identity all the time. You know, you're a violinist, or you're a conductor who used to be a violinist, or you are a singer who used to, you know, do something else. You know, and I think that we, in our own world, in our own minds, we're constantly battling our identity, and having those conversations about the depth and the sort of 3-dimension aspect of our identity as artists will prevent us from thinking in a one-dimensional term of, you know, well, this role must be filled by this kind of person who looks this way. And instead of thinking about, well, what is the motivation of this character? What is the arc of this character? What is the journey? What is the hero's journey of this character? And could that be applied to people who look differently and who have different ideas?
Yeah, there are a few points I want to get into to wrap us up as we begin to close. But Jamie, you know, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the fact that for Asian people, you know, there's this stereotype of being in these specific operas and that being the issue. I feel like on our side of the conversation, the issue is tragedy. We're always dying. We're always poor. We're always something. You know, how do you deal with that, or what do you think the conversation is that we need to start having around that idea? Especially, I'm gonna put you on the spot, considering the role that you're making famous, you know, with one of these new operas, I Can't Breathe. How do we tackle taking on the activist work from the stage while not always being centered in trauma and being downtrodden?
That is, I mean, thank you for, throwing me out there like that, Gary. No. Listen, there ain't no shame to my game over here. But before I go there, I just have to drop the mic points to Nina. I don't know if y'all caught this out there. I don't know if y'all caught what my girl said. But she said, okay, she said butterfly, pearl fishers, all of these problematic depictions. These are not our stories. Did y'all hear that?
Mm-hmm.
Did y'all hear that? That is a powerful declaration, because it's like, well, we're not telling a real story anyway. Like, this is the figment of Puccini's imagination. Like, this is not our story. So, yeah, if this is the entry place for your imagination, because you're not, like Tiffany said, because you lack the imagination, at the very least, let it begin here. We know this is not our story, but let it begin here. So that, I think that is a knowing that even as we engage Porgy and Bess, that should we declare, I mean, this ain't our story anyway. And so, to Tiffany's point, so what is this person's motivation? What is this person's arc? This fictional character, right? We stop wearing it as though it's ours. That's one thing. But for me in this space, I always I gotta put this up there because my girl Christian, a whole world. She peeped it. I'm like, I know I'm not the only one who heard this. She said, "This is not our story." Bam. But as far as the depictions and the stories that now all of a sudden there's Black stories to be told, right? And I heard something similar being spoken to from Nina and Helen. It's like, well, when it's time to do one of these stereotypical operas, all of a sudden you got all of these voices, but then when it comes to telling other stories, you act like we don't exist. It's like, oh, what, you couldn't, you found 50-11 Black people to tell Porgy and Bess, but then we came to the rest of the season, and now all of a sudden you don't have the voices to do. So that's a whole nother thing. But we have these stories now that are being told, and I liken it to Tyler Perry. So here's the thing. Tyler Perry is not for everybody.
I'm gonna pray too, James, because I don't know what's coming.
Y'all go ahead. Y'all get him on the main line. Tell him what you want, okay? Tyler Perry is not for everyone, right? And speaking of the conversations that we'll have internally within the Black community, there are some who terribly lament Tyler Perry's ascent in his work, because it's just like, oh my goodness, he just all I heard was bad wigs. Christian. Okay, listen, I'm trying to get to my point, y'all. I'm really trying to get there. But there are some who all they had the bad wigs, the incomplete storylines, the just the different archetypes. And really what I hear and heard in the lamenting was that it's because those, especially for the longest time, were the only stories that were being told, right? So it's like, it wouldn't even be so offensive to so many people if there was variety, if there were other things being told, right? So listen, we're Black. We know there's tragedy We know I'm Black, okay? I get it. And also, you know, this was my biggest complaint with what's my girl? Lena Waithe, Hustle, not Hustle and Flow. Girl, what is the thing?
They running from the law.
What was that?
I know what that movie is. One sec, I'll look it up. Keep going.
You know, it was the black Bonnie and Clyde type of thing.
Yeah.
And that was my, you know, issue with the movie and how it ended.
And Slim.
Yes, Hustle and Slim. Yes. I won't give out any, you know, spoilers, but the way that movie ended, it's like you're imagining this. Can you imagine something like less tragic? For the opera that I am making famous, it's scary to say. I'll take it. I Can't Breathe. The reason I am doing this is because of the way the story is told, that it does not center the tragedy. We know the tragedy, right? No spoiler needed for this one, right? I Can't Breathe, it's in the title. But the thing that we get from this show and from this story is we get the human dimension of each of these archetypal characters. I play the mother, and as the mother, you know, ultimately my son is gunned down by the police. We don't see that until the very end of my scene. What we do see is me folding laundry. We see me telling my son to get up. He not finna be a bum just because he out of school. He still got his chores. We see me talking about my dreams for him, my son. We see me talking about my own course of my own life. We get to see the humanity. We get to see the mother. And this is a mother who we don't have to dilute her Blackness to make her accessible, right? She is very much Black. And also any mother listening and watching that mother can relate to everything that she's sharing. And so I tell this story because this archetypal mother deserves the fuller dignity of her story and not just who we meet at the podium when she's in tears after her son has been killed and she's crying for justice.
Yep.
She deserves her story of, you know, how she, you know, was that one back in her day. You know, she deserves those things. So to get back to your question, Garrett, we need more than tragedy. And sometimes tragedy is the jumping off point. And also, we go to the theater for the imaginative escapes.
Right.
I don't need to escape into, you know, the real life tragedies. In fact, we as creators have the power to shift the lived reality through our imaginings on the stage.
Right. And before, you know, but before we get into the final portion of our conversation, just to put a pin on the repertoire part of our conversation, I just don't have it here for George Gershwin, and the complaints that I make about Porgy and Bess, I'll make about Rhapsody in Blue. I'll make about An American in Paris. I'll make about the Piano Concerto. That's a different conversation. I just wanted to make sure that that was said in this space. So, so as we wrap up and get to the final part of the conversation, we all understand the importance of a united front, of unity across different communities, and how that will ultimately benefit everyone. We aren't here arguing that. The unfortunate reality, though, is within our respective communities, there are challenges when it comes to making those connections. There are Black people who are just uninterested in any sort of collaboration outside of Blackness. I would imagine that is true with other communities. Nina, Tiffany, or Helen, I'll throw it out openly. How do we deal with, or how do you deal with that internal struggle for cross-community unity?
So I'm happy to start. I can speak from, my family's experience in the United States. My grandparents were incarcerated during World War II, Japanese Americans. And soon after World War II, my father was born, and he was told, you do not identify as Japanese. You are American. You keep your head down. You do not complain. You work as hard as you can. You do not ever internalize any of the hate that will be coming your way because you are Japanese American. And so this idea, was then passed down to me. And through that, like, I spent my whole life just working as hard as I can, letting everything roll off my back, not internalizing all of the racism that was coming my way, right? And so what I'm finding as we are in, our infant stages of the Asian Opera Alliance is that we're having a hard time even getting our own community to necessarily share stories amongst ourselves. And so, the first step for us is like, how can we get our own communities to engage and share these stories? Because there are so many, like we've talked about, so many different identities of Asian American. We have in the Asian Opera Alliance, we've got, people who were raised in Asia, born and raised in Asia, and lived as in the majority for most of their lives, right? And then we have, fifth generation Asian Americans who have a totally different lived experience. So within our own community, we are still trying to even grasp how that works. Like, as growing up in America, we all learn about slavery amongst Black people in the United States, right? But how many people actually learn about, like, the Chinese Exclusion Act or, Japanese
internment camps, right?
Exactly. There's so much that has been hidden about the Asian American experience for so long that is where we are starting. And let alone even, like, being able to bridge out and talk with other communities, which thankfully we are here talking with you, but it's a difficult thing for us in the Asian Opera Alliance. I don't know if Helen or Tiffany has anything they want to add.
I'm happy to go next. So I think one thing that we all need to remember is that throughout history, the Asian community and the African American community actually used to work together. And the model minority myth about the Asian community was created in the 60s and the 70s to purposely drive an edge between the communities. It's from the white supremacy's attempts to do that. So I think it's in all of our duty to work together to act against that if our goal is to combat white supremacy. And another thing that I think is really important is that we all have privileges that we as individuals have that others might not. Sometimes it's hard to remember that as people of color, as minorities. I think I went to this EDI training, a really terrible EDI training, unfortunately. I was asked to both live through my childhood trauma as a person of color and being told that I'm actually white. Great. Oh, I think I mentioned that a little earlier. Mm-hmm. Maybe I didn't. And also this person had talked about how as an immigrant, you don't really understand all the troubles that people of color have to go through in America, and they don't understand their privileges. They don't understand anything. They're just stupid. I was born in China and moved to the United States when I was younger. So I'm what people would call a 0.5 generation American. So that I have experiences living abroad from another culture, but also have fully integrated in the American culture as well. So I understand both experiences a little bit. And I think a lot of Americans don't understand that there's so many privileges that people have that
Mm.
you don't even realize. To be able to graduate from school and not worry about whether you're going to be able to stay in this country the next day, to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to get your paperwork in order, and to go into an audition to, never being questioned that you actually speak English.
Mm.
These are all privileges that we have. And I think if we want to ask others to do the same thing, we need to examine all of ourselves first. Really to examine the white supremacists that's in all of us. If we want to connect with others, we have to lend out a hand first.
Absolutely. The next time I'm in an EDI training and someone asks me to speak to my trauma, I'm going to talk about the trauma I'm going through in this EDI training and see what they think about that. Um, Tiffany, as we close up, any words or ideas concerning creating unity internally toward creating community and unity externally?
Well, I just want to thank Nina and Helen for being so open and vulnerable and sharing, because I feel like that is step one, is to be brave and have the courage to share, and for us all to create the space for everyone to feel like that they can be that they can be seen and valued for who they are, and not who they want to try to pretend to be or who they think they should be.
Mhm.
And I think what I'm always thinking about is practicing empathy. And really, empathy is a muscle. You have to work at it every day, or else it atrophies, because you're not practicing it. And so for me, it's practicing the act of listening. And so when I'm in a conversation like this, I try to be the last one to speak if I can, and to just listen. And I think that we can all practice our listening skills in order to be more empathetic for everyone who's in the room.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm gonna, Jamie, I'm gonna close us out with a quote. But before I do that, I want to throw the same question to the both of you. Tiffany just mentioned empathy. When it comes to having empathy for the unique struggles of other communities, that is an important part of creating these broader communities. At the same time, America as an institution is built and was built on our ancestors. And there are so many things, so many big things that specifically impact us and that we are specifically owed. So I'll start with you, Jamie. What words can you offer in balancing having that community specific empathy while standing up for what is rightfully ours as a Black community?
I think I don't think that they're at odds at all. I think that, to Helen's point and to Tiffany's point, when we do the work of internally excavating the white supremacy that exists within, right, we are doing that work of restoring ourselves at the very least, right? And we position ourselves to better hear, to better see, right, from a truer lens. And I will even say, because the thing that brought us together, the thing that broke the urgency of this conversation, was the incidences, the environment, the culture, the climate at Long Beach Opera. And that served as an opportunity to, one, see how instances of racism and misogyny overlapped and affected everybody,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, and even with that, with them being an organization that is run by a woman who is accused of perpetuating, a climate and a culture of misogyny and of white supremacy, even in that, having the door remain open for conversation right? Because to Tiffany's point earlier, folk be scared to talk about this stuff, right? Because we're afraid of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, being painted with the wrong brush. And then what happens is that institutions and structures fall back on what they know. And what they know is a very white supremacist way of being, which attempts to silence those people who have been violated, and attempts to paint itself as, I'm not racist, right? Again, we always talk about the fear of being called racist, overriding the fear of being racist in practice, right? And so the empathy is in being honest, being truthful, being clear, being direct from a place that seeks to shift the structure for everybody. Because while the structures are built off of this myth of white supremacy, we know that that myth is harmful to white folks too. So the empathy is in speaking our truths, right? To Nina's point, to really seeking to give air and give platform for these experiences to know that they exist and that they are valid and that they need to be addressed. And it is some of the most empathetic work to reach across to others who may not know that experience, and to share with them in a very clear, direct, honest, truth-filled way that still has space to say, okay, now we know. Are we willing to do something different with all of this? So I don't
Right.
think it's an either or. I think the empathy is in me, in my Blackness, in my Black experience, coming and bringing that to the table, to the forefront, and say, let's deal with what really is from this angle, and let's deal with what really is from this angle, acknowledging that there is in fact enough space for all of it, and that there is virtue in signing everybody's pledge.
Right, right. And I'm gonna underscore something you said to make sure that the people heard you. White supremacy is damaging to white people as well. So once we really have the empathy and the honesty and the courage to point to this thing that's oppressing all of us, we can all get better together. And on top of that, deal with some of the even bigger things that are oppressing everybody, like capitalism and the patriarchy that supersedes race and all of these things. I'm gonna James, I'm gonna throw you the final curveball, because Jamie really got my mind going, and she mentioned Long Beach Opera, so I'll frame it there. Empathy meets obligation at some points. We have an opera company, who has proven their inequitable practices, and at the same time is set to stage an opera by a Black composer with a Black man on the podium and Black people all over the stage. How do you, or what words do you have when it comes to having that empathy versus the realities of needing to pay one's rent?
Right. And right around the time that this LBO stuff was happening, BOA was also dealing with the Emmett Till opera fiasco, and it was a similar thing. We want, in the spirit of empathy and of love, which is the only reason we are even bothering to raise these concerns. We love opera and we love our compatriots and colleagues. So if we didn't love them, at least, I don't know about y'all, but I would just walk away into the sunset, right? So we must love them because we're still here. But in situations like that, we have to be joyful that some of us are able to pay their rent with their art. However, what we want is better than the best that white supremacy has to offer.
Right.
Right. So a situation like what is going on down at LBO, for instance, except for the color involved, perfectly echoes a lot of other situations in the arts where, say, white women are thrown under the bus and the white men are carrying the torch. Oh, we're doing this thing, we're doing this thing about Irish Americans or about Italian Americans, and then later you realize that, yes, the boys club was fine, but all the women involved were treated like crap, right?
Right.
This is because white supremacy does not have a plus to offer us, right? White supremacy only has the best for some, right? If we are looking at our world of art is imaginary. This is the space where we should be able to find something better, show or foreshadow something better, because they say art mirrors life, but we also inform life. We know this is our responsibility, right? We have the best chance possibly of any sector to imagine something that is better than the best of white supremacy. So that's kind of where I stand on it. And you, especially Jamie and Garrett and the other members of the LC, know that my attitudes about this are not a secret. But I'm always, I support Black people making a paycheck. However, I think I can say with complete confidence that if we are relying on opera to make a paycheck, we are usually not at the point where we are either that or destitute. Sometimes we are doing that and destitute. We know this. But it is not a question of life and death at that point. It is a question of my checkbook or my principles. And if I'm in the position to choose between those two, or even have to make a choice, right? I can't support it. It's not where we want to be. Is it a way station on the way? Some people think so. However, I do not personally think that this is the direction we want to go. We basically moved from not having Black people visible and having us treated badly behind the scenes to having Black people visible and still treated badly behind the scenes. So
Yep.
I will pray, not for Tyler Perry, but for better options.
You can pray for Tyler too now. Come on, James.
Tyler will be fine. He's a billionaire. Isn't he a billionaire? But he'll be fine. Tyler ain't checking for me. If he has a role for me, I'll take it too. Just not the wig. I'm not going to put a wig on this. I'm going to keep
I need to see you in some cornrows, James.
Right. Oh, please, God, no. Please. Here's my soul. But yes, we deserve better than the best of white supremacy.
Yep. And we'll let all the people chew on that. So considering the meeting of the Black Opera Alliance and the Asian Opera Alliance, I wanted to close with a quote from a legendary activist named Grace Lee Boggs. If there's anyone watching who does not know who Grace Lee Boggs is, go get your education. There's I think an 1.5-hour documentary that you can watch for free on YouTube, a historic Asian woman who fought tirelessly for all people, especially Black folks in the city of Detroit. So just an incredible figure at that intersection of the needs of Asian communities and Black communities. So I'm going to read a quote from her. She said, "We urgently need to bring to our communities the limitless capacity to love, serve, and create for and with each other. We urgently need to bring the neighbor back into our hoods, not only in our inner cities, but also in our suburbs, our gated communities, on Main Street and Wall Street, and on Ivy League campuses." I'll add to that quote, also in opera houses and Western classical music spaces. So I appreciate everyone joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for being here to engage this conversation. Before we officially dismiss Nina, how can folks learn more about the Asian Opera Alliance and become a member if they so choose?
Yeah, we have a website, asianoperaalliance.com. You can find us on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, and we do have a community that's specifically for Asian identifying folks in the opera industry. So if you are Asian identifying and you would like to join a safe space, we have one there for you that we are creating community in. And we thank you so much, Black Opera Alliance, for having this conversation with us. It's really exciting to start to work together.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Jamie, remind folks about the Black specific organization that exists in opera.
Well, hey, one of them, that's us. So follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Black Opera Alliance. Twitter, we're over there, kind of. Black Opera All, go ahead and you might see something pop up over there. And also, we want to invite you to visit our website and to donate. What? Why donate? Because we are in these streets doing this work. And y'all know, y'all got to pay bills. Well, we got bills too. I mean, not so much bills, but we got things, we want to do,
Say other
right?
people's
Like,
bills sometimes, yeah.
well, other people's bills. Exactly.
Yeah.
To James's point, we support our members in their audition needs, in some of their
Application
educational
fees,
needs,
yeah.
application fees, grants, educational opportunities, master classes, just will bring people in to talk about finances, just all kinds of stuff. So we invite you to visit our website, blackoperaalliance.org/donate, and contribute, so that we can be more about the work of supporting Black folks in opera.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for being here once again. Thank you to everyone for watching. To freedom. Let's do it. Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.
Thank
To
you.
freedom.
Thank you, guys.